Hello and welcome to this Legal Aid New South Wales webinar. This webinar is intended to provide general advice for people applying to come to Australia under the Offshore Humanitarian Program. The information provided is correct as of the time of recording. During this webinar, we will briefly discuss the humanitarian visa options for people from Afghanistan, how to apply for a humanitarian visa, what to include in your statement in support of your visa application, who can act as a sponsor, and some frequently asked questions. We will also briefly discuss the 449 visas towards the end of the webinar. Let's begin. There are 5 types or classes of humanitarian visas available. The same form is used to apply for any of these visas, and the process for applying is the same. The eligibility criteria for each of these visas are slightly different, but the government will assess the visa applicant against all the different criteria when assessing the application. The Subclass 202 is the sponsored visa. You can apply for the other visas without a sponsor. But we recommend you attach a sponsorship form regardless of what visa your family is applying for, or whether they are inside or outside Afghanistan. This is because the sponsorship form shows the relationship the visa applicant has to people in Australia, and the extent of the visa applicant's connection to Australia is one of the factors the Department of Home Affairs will take into account. The Department of Home Affairs is our Department of Immigration, who process and grant visas. A person without a sponsor is unlikely to get any of these visas. Frequently asked questions about sponsoring. Who can act as a sponsor? To sponsor someone, you must be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident of Australia. If you are the holder of a temporary visa, such as a CHEV or TPV, you cannot sponsor your family. How many people can I sponsor? There is no limit on how many people one person can sponsor, but if you are sponsoring many different applications with multiple family members, it might be more difficult for all of them to be granted a visa. When you act as a sponsor, you are saying that you will help and support the visa applicant settle in Australia. You should also remember that if the visa applicants are outside of Afghanistan and they are granted a Subclass 202 visa, then you must pay for and organise their travel to Australia. You may want to think about who is at most risk right now and sponsor them first and sponsor other family members later. Can I sponsor a friend? The law says you can sponsor a friend, but there is only a very small chance that a visa will be granted to someone who is not sponsored by a family member. Are sponsored applications prioritised based on their sponsor? There are different priority levels for sponsored humanitarian visa applications based on who the sponsor is. The closer the relation is between the visa applicant and the sponsor, the stronger the connection will be to Australia, and the visa application will be given higher priority. Applicants who are sponsored by close relatives, such as a parent, sibling, or child, or relatives who live in a regional area, are given higher priority, followed by extended family, and then friends or distant relatives. Applicants sponsored by a holder of an 866 protection visa or an 851 resolution of status visa are given the lowest priority, even if they are sponsoring close relatives. Each year, the Australian government sets a number of visas under the Refugee and Humanitarian Program. The current limit is 13,750 visas. On 19 August 2021, the Australian government announced that they would set aside at least 3,000 humanitarian visas for people from Afghanistan. The government also announced that the following people would get priority: Afghans who are at risk because of their work assisting the Australian Defence Force or the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade or AusAid or the Australian Federal Police will be prioritised. This is called the Locally Engaged Employees Program, or LEE for short. People who come within this program would have received a letter from the government department they worked for, saying they have been assessed as being at risk. They would have then been invited to make an application for a visa. It is a two-step process. People who claim to have worked under the LEE program must attach certification from the Australian government confirming this. If you have family or friends who you think might be eligible, you should get advice about their particular circumstances. We have included our contact details at the end of this webinar. The government is also prioritising extended family members of people who have come to Australia under the LEE program, people who had already lodged an application for a Subclass Visa 202 and have been waiting for the application to be determined, and persecuted minorities such as women and girls, children, ethnic minorities such as the Hazara, and other vulnerable groups. Looking at the numbers, you will see that very few people will get a visa. If the main visa applicant does not fall into one of the priority groups, there is only a small chance that they will get a humanitarian visa. It will also take a long time to process the application, and if a person is granted a visa while they are in Afghanistan, it might be difficult for them to leave. Now let's look at how to apply for a humanitarian visa. No matter what visa you are applying for, you must complete a Form 842. If you are being sponsored by an Australian citizen or permanent resident, the sponsor must complete a Form 681 and attach it to your visa application. The sponsor must also attach proof of their Australian citizenship or permanent resident visa. If the sponsor lives in a regional area, they should also attach proof of this, such as a copy of their driver's license, Centrelink pension card, bill, or tenancy agreement, anything that shows their name and their address. You can download the form from the Department of Home Affairs website. You can only include one family unit on each Form 842. We will talk about who you can include in the Form 842 later on in this webinar. How to complete the forms. The forms must be completed in English. If you write your answers in your own language, you must have the answers translated. It is very important that the names of all applicants are written on the Form 842 and 681 as they appear on any ID documents you have. You should answer each question on the form as best as you can. If the question does not apply, then you should write NA, which means not applicable. Where it asks for an address, you should write a full address if possible, such as house or camp number, street name, town or city, state or area. Where it asks for details of employment and schooling, you should do your best to complete these sections. If an applicant has never worked or has never attended school, you should still write their names and say, never employed or never attended school. There are questions in the Form 842 about the harm you fear. This is the most important part of the form. If you can, it is best to write a separate statement and attach it to the Form 842, and simply write "See attached statement" in the form. Each adult listed in the application can complete their own statement and attach it to the Form 842. The statement is the story of the problems you have in Afghanistan, what you are afraid will happen to you, and why you are afraid. The Department of Home Affairs will use your statement to assess how strong your case is and whether they should grant you a visa. There are a lot of people applying for a visa, so make sure that your statement is specific to you and your family and detailed. Here are some tips. If anything has happened to you in the past, for example, threatened or harmed, write a detailed account of this. You should include the place where the incident happened, the names of the person or persons involved in the incident, the dates of when the incident happened. If you cannot remember the exact date, try to write the month and year, or an estimate of when in the year it happened. You should also explain why you were attacked. If you are being targeted by the Taliban, explain why in detail. If you are being persecuted because of your religion, ethnicity, political view, or some other reason, then it is very important you include this in your statement. You should also attach any evidence that supports this. For example, if you are working with the Australian government or for the former Afghan government, you should attach proof of your employment. If you have family members who worked with the Australian government in the past, which makes you a target now, you should include proof of your relatives' work with the Australian government. If you have not been directly threatened or harmed, but you have heard from friends, family, or colleagues about threats they have received or harm they have experienced, then you can write this in your statement and explain why you think the same thing will happen to you. For example, because you are of the same ethnicity or worked in the same occupation. Try to avoid general or vague answers. It is not about what everyone might face if they stay in Afghanistan or return to Afghanistan, but what you and anyone else listed on the application might face if you stay in Afghanistan or return to Afghanistan. Your answers should be we or I. When answering the question about what you think might happen to you if you stay in Afghanistan or return to Afghanistan, try to avoid saying, I don't know, or anything can happen. Instead, write a list of the types of harm you and your family might experience, and then explain why you think this might happen. For example, because it has happened to you or a relative or someone close to you before. Your statement should explain and give examples of why you in particular are at risk, and not just give general details about how the Taliban are targeting everybody. Frequently asked questions about completing the application forms. Do I need to sign the Form 842? If possible, anyone over the age of 18 listed on the application should sign the form. If you are being sponsored, you can electronically sign the necessary pages or print out the relevant pages, sign them, and then take a clear photo of the signed pages and send it to your sponsor. If it is impossible for you to sign the form this way, your sponsor should sign the form on your behalf, but they should explain they have done this by attaching a statement or a letter to your application. If you are not being sponsored and it is impossible for you to sign your form, you can still lodge the application without your signature. Do I need a valid passport to apply for a humanitarian visa? No, you can still apply even without a passport. But if you do have a passport, even if it is expired, you should include details of the passport in your Form 842 and attach a copy of your passport to your application as a form of ID. Do I need identification documents to apply for a humanitarian visa? It is very important that you provide some form of ID with your application. If you have a tazkira, you should attach a copy to your Form 842. Any identification documents you attach should be translated into English if possible. If you do not have any identification documents, you can still lodge an application, but it will take much longer to get a decision because the Department of Home Affairs needs to verify your identity. Do I need to attach a passport photograph of all the applicants? If you are planning on lodging your application online, you must have passport photographs of all the applicants. If you do not upload the passport photographs, the system will not let you lodge the application online. If you are planning on lodging your application by post, then you can still apply without the passport photographs. But we recommend you attach passport photographs to your Form 842 if you can get these. If it is too difficult for you to get passport photographs and you are being sponsored, then you can take good quality photographs of only your face and the face of each person included in the application and send the photographs to your sponsor. Your sponsor can upload these electronically if they lodge your application online, or print the photographs and attach them to your application if they are lodging the application by post. Who can be included in the visa application? You can only include one family unit on each Form 842. A member of a family unit is a person who is dependent on the family head. The family head does not need to be the main applicant. A member of the family unit can be a spouse, a dependent child, including stepchildren and adopted children, a dependent child of a dependent child, and a relative who does not have a spouse and usually lives in the same household as the family head and is dependent on the family head. There are rules about who is a relative and who is considered a dependent. A relative is a close family member, such as a spouse, child, parent, or sibling, or an extended family member, such as a grandparent, grandchild, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, or cousin. In-laws are not included in the list of persons considered to be a relative. A person is considered to be a dependent if they are completely or substantially reliant on the other person for financial, psychological, or physical support. Children who are married are generally not considered as being dependent on their parents, and generally cannot be included in the same application form as their parents. Let's look at an example. You wish to sponsor your parents and siblings. You have 3 siblings who are under 18 years of age. You have 2 siblings who are aged between 19 and 25 years old. They are not married or engaged and live with your parents. You have 1 brother who is married and has 3 dependent children. You also have a 15-year-old niece who lives with your parents and has lived with them since her parents passed away. On one Form 842, you can include your mother and father, your siblings who are under 18 years of age, your 2 siblings aged between 19 and 25 years old, and your 15-year-old niece. Your parents should include a statement explaining your 15-year-old niece's circumstances to show that she is dependent on them. As your brother is married and has his own family, he must complete a separate Form 842. He can include his wife and children in the application. You, as the sponsor, must complete a separate Form 681 for each of the applications. Let's look at another example. You wish to sponsor your parents and your 32-year-old sister. Your sister is not married and your parents live with her. Your sister works and your parents depend on your sister for financial and day-to-day support. Although your parents are dependent on your sister, you cannot include them both on your sister's application. This is because you can only include dependent relatives who do not have a spouse, so someone who is unmarried or widowed. So your parents will need to complete one Form 842, and your sister will need to complete a separate Form 842. You as the sponsor will need to complete a Form 681 for each of the applications. If you are not sure whether a family member can be included in your Form 842 or if they need to complete their own application, you should get legal advice about your situation. We have included our contact details at the end of this webinar. Lodging the application. Where you lodge your visa application depends on whether you are being sponsored or not. If your family is sponsoring your application must be lodged in Australia. There are two ways your sponsor can do this. Number 1, by post. Your sponsor will need to post your Form 842 and Form 681 to the Special Humanitarian Processing Centre, Department of Home Affairs, GPO Box 9984, Sydney, New South Wales 2001. Your sponsor can also arrange a courier service to deliver the application to the Special Humanitarian Processing Centre at Level 3, 26 Lee Street, Sydney, New South Wales 2001. The second way to lodge the application is via the online portal. You can access the portal by going to the Department of Home Affairs website. Your sponsor will need to upload the completed Form 842 and Form 681. Your sponsor will also need to upload your passport photographs and proof of their Australian citizenship or permanent resident visa. The online system will not allow your sponsor to submit the application without these documents. We recommend lodging via the online portal, but if your sponsor is unable to lodge electronically, they can still post the application. If you are not being sponsored, you must lodge your Form 842 overseas. Your application must be posted to the Australian Embassy in Amman at 41 Kayed Al Armuti Street, Abdoun Al Janobi, Amman, Jordan, or to PO Box 35201, Amman 11185, Jordan. There is no application fee to apply for a humanitarian visa. If your family is outside of Afghanistan and they are granted a Subclass 202 visa, you will have to organise and pay for their travel to Australia. For people granted any of the other humanitarian visas, so the Subclass 200 Refugee visa, 201 in-country Special Humanitarian visa, 203 Emergency visa, or 204 Woman at Risk visa, the Australian Government will pay for and organise their travel. When your family arrives in Australia, they will be eligible for Centrelink and Medicare no matter what humanitarian visa they arrive on. What can I do while I wait? It is important that you keep your contact details up to date with the Department of Home Affairs because you do not want to miss anything they send you about the application. If your family's circumstances change, for example, a family member is harmed or attacked, or your family travels to another country, you should write to the Department of Home Affairs updating them of your family's situation. You can also contact the Department of Home Affairs to ask about the progress of the application. Please remember that the department has received thousands of applications and it will take a long time for the application to be processed. You can contact the Department of Home Affairs by email at shp.inquiries@homeaffairs.gov.au or by telephone on +612 6196 0196 or on 131 881. Whenever you contact the Department of Home Affairs, you should provide the main applicant's full name and date of birth, the application file number, the main applicant's relationship to you as the sponsor, the main applicant's telephone number and email, and your contact details as the sponsor. Subclass 449 Humanitarian Stay Visas. The Subclass 449 visa is a temporary visa granted to people who have been displaced from their home, cannot return to their home, and are in grave fear for their personal safety because of the circumstances that led to their displacement. The Australian government granted this type of visa to many Afghan people in August 2021 during the emergency evacuations. Since then, there have been some questions frequently asked by these visa holders and their family members. Frequently asked questions about Subclass 449 visas. When does my 449 visa expire? The Australian government granted Subclass 449 visas with a 3-month expiry period. The government can extend the expiry of these visas. What will happen with my visa? There is limited information about the government's plan for 449 visa holders. What we currently know is that the Department of Home Affairs will contact 449 visa holders and ask them to make a visa application for permanent residency in Australia. We have not been given any information about when this might happen or what visa holders will have to show to get the permanent visa. If you are a 449 visa holder and you receive any letters from the Department of Home Affairs, you should contact us immediately for advice. We have set out our contact details at the end of this webinar. Can I sponsor my family if I am a 449 visa holder? No, you cannot sponsor anyone while you hold a 449 visa because you are not a permanent resident of Australia. Can my family in Afghanistan apply for a 449 visa? Unlike the humanitarian visas, there is no application form to apply for a 449 visa. This is because you can only apply if the Australian government invites you to apply for this visa. My family was granted a 449 visa, but they are still in Afghanistan. What can I do? If you have family who were granted a 449 visa but were unable to leave Afghanistan and are still overseas, you can register their details with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade via the DFAT COVID portal at covid19.dfat.gov.au. You can also call the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on 1300 555 135 and give them your family members' details, including their contact number and email, and details of when their 449 visa was granted. As the Australian Defence Force has withdrawn from Afghanistan, the chances of any family members still in Afghanistan being evacuated is very low. Your family can still use their 449 visa to travel to Australia if they leave Afghanistan, as long as their visa has not expired. We hope most of your questions have been answered through this webinar, but if you still have questions about your situation, please contact the Refugee Service to book a telephone appointment. You can call us on 8713 6725 or email us at refugeeservice@legalaid.nsw.gov.au. Our service is free and confidential, and we can provide you with an interpreter.